Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 2 discussion. In about 12 to 18 hours, depending when in the day New Zealand time grinding gear games decide to push patch 0.1.1 live, the patch is going to go live. They've released the patch notes. I'll put a link to them down in the description below. Now, normally I would have a little bit more time to go through all of the details of the patch notes. I still might do that in the morning, but I'm going to need some sleep before I attempt that. What I wanted to do in this video is just go through some of the biggest buffs that are hidden in here. Now, I don't want to cover really obvious buffs like the changes to the Arbiter of Ash boss fight, where you're now going to have additional portals there. Instead, I want to look at some of the things that are a little bit more subtle. The first is the overall boost to Waystone Sustain that is somewhat hidden in this patch notes. So let's talk about the pieces that put this together. Firstly, they're adding a new precursor tablet, the Overseer's one, that's going to force map bosses onto maps that otherwise would not have them. They have to be maps that are eligible to have a boss on them, so you're not going to be able to get these in maps that just don't have a boss at all, but these are going to mean that you'll be able to fight considerably more map bosses if you're able to loot these and use them. They only drop from map bosses, so this is something that will help you sustain fighting map bosses. Now, the thing that's important here is that these are applying alongside a suite of other changes that are applying to map bosses at the same time. So the chance for maps to contain bosses is being increased to approximately 25%. I believe it was 15% beforehand. That would be 25% once you had a map tile set that was eligible to have a map boss on it. But I think that about 40% of the map tile sets just weren't eligible to have a map boss at all. Maybe they're planned to have one that's in Act 4, 5, or 6. Maybe they're just not planned to have one at all. Whatever the case, this roughly 15% is being raised to exactly 25%. At the same time, there's a number of changes to direct drops of waystones that come from map bosses. So the chance for map bosses to drop a waystone of the current tier or higher has been reduced to account for the increase in the total number of map bosses. Radiant Waystone's Atlas Notable passive now provides 15% chance, rather than 25%, to get a waystone of the current tier or higher, and the small map boss passives have also been nerfed by 40%. Now, these individually are little nerfs, but when you take the whole package together, the increase in the number of map bosses that you fight is going to end up being the more substantial factor overall. So you've got one factor multiplying your chance of getting a waystone, one dividing them, and the one that's multiplying them, aka more map boss fights, is the one that's going to win out overall. And the key thing that causes the difference is those Overseer's precursor tablets. If those weren't there, this would be a net neutral set of changes, but because they're there, it ends up being a net positive to the amount of waystones that drop. It's important to notice also that these waystones are going to be at the highest level of the waystones that you're running, because they're always at least equal to the waystone that you encounter the map boss in. So you're going to see more tier 15 waystones dropping this way, and fewer tier 7s. So that's the first buff. Early on in progression, when map sustain actually does get tight, at some point during tier 7, 8, 9, 10 waystones, it starts to get a bit tight. During that point, you can use these map boss mechanics to massively increase your map sustain, and then later on, you'll end up with quad tabs full of tier 14 and 15 waystones, just like you do now. Now, the second buff is a buff to player survivability, and it's from one of the monsters that seem to be killing me more than pretty much anything else, the Slither Spitter. These things are having their projectile damage halved, and it's being changed from chaos damage to physical damage. This is going to be one of those things that substantially boosts player survivability against trash monsters in maps, because these things seem to be the most dangerous thing, at least in my experience. Maybe your experience has been different, but these things seem to be killing me more than everything else put together. Third, we have a massive buff to an item that's being ported across from Path of Exile 1, and that had landed with a whimper rather than a bang. Defiance of Destiny is one of the rarest category of drop anywhere uniques in Path of Exile 1, and it's a massive chase item that can be extremely valuable in that game, especially early on in a league. Now, that item has been ported to PoE 2, and in PoE 2, it looks kind of like this. It's got a boost to your maximum life, it grants some strength, grants some mana regen rate, but the big line is recover 5% of missing life before being hit by an enemy. So, if you've got 3,000 maximum life, but you're currently sitting at 1,800 life, that means that when you're hit by an enemy, before the damage is dealt to you, you recover 60 life. That is 5% of the 1,200 life that you are missing on your character. Now note that in practice, you're always going to put 20% life quality on this item. It's too rare not to do that. And as a result, you'll get 6%, or with a very lucky Varlorb outcome, you might even end up with 7%. So that's the way it worked before this patch note change. Now, that line of text is being doubled. It's going to be 12% without the lucky Varlorb result, and with a lucky Varlorb result, it might even go as high as 14%. This item has just gotten a lot better as a result of this patch note change. Now, Is this the thing that life is missing in order to become competitive with Energy Shield? No, this is not it on its own. However, it's still something that does help close the gap a little bit between life builds and Energy Shield builds, but ultimately it's going to take some other system changes to life in general in order to put Defiance of Destiny in the center of the meta. Now, it's just simply something that is much better than it used to be. The second unique item that is getting a tremendous buff is also one of the very, very rare items in Path of Exile 2, and it's something that is the ultimate chase item in Path of Exile 1. So Original Sin is a ring that is essentially to Path of Exile 1 what Temporalis is to Path of Exile 2. It is the reward for beating the Trials of the Sekhmet, which are called the Sanctum in PoE 1, without taking a single hit, and when using an extremely rare unique relic. Original Sin was ported over and kind of done dirty originally in Path of Exile 2. Here's what it looks like on the live servers right now. A small amount of Chaos Res, 100% of your elemental damage is converted to Chaos damage, and your character's Chaos resistance is 0. So with the exception of Chaos Inoculation builds, this simply makes you too squishy when enemies are dealing Chaos damage to you. This means that you've got no resistance to that damage, and on top of that, Chaos damage does double damage to Energy Shield in Path of Exile 2, which means that you're even less able to just endure it through an enormous buffer. Ultimately, Original Sin was not quite dead on arrival in Path of Exile 2, but it was pretty close to it. Well, that is all changing. In Path of Exile 1, instead of your Chaos resistance being 0, it was nearby enemies have their Chaos resistance overwritten by the number 0, which was extremely good. Now in Path of Exile 2, a lot of important monsters have 0 Chaos resistance, so converting damage into Chaos damage is actually really beneficial in general. However, there is something really important coming to OSIN in the near future. It is losing that Chaos resistance is 0 drawback, and it is gaining a sizable chunk of Chaos resistance as a bonus. In practice, because this item is so rare, you would actually probably divine it to end up getting a 22 or 23 on that Chaos resistance explicit mod. You might get 31, 32, 33, 34, 35, or even with a perfect roll, 36% Chaos resistance on this item, alongside also having all of the other benefits and getting rid of that drawback entirely. If you are looking to pick up an Original Sin though, I've got some bad news for you. The existing ones, the pre-patch ones, they've exploded in price to the high 30s of Divine Orbs already. This is for the uncorrupted ones. This is just people who are taking a gamble that when the patch goes live, that they will be able to apply a Divine Orb to change it into the new mods. This is not something that the patch notes say you can do. So these people are just taking a 39 Divine gamble, and they still expect there's enough of a chance to get paid off that they're willing to do that. For that reason, especially if you can't apply a Divine Orb to turn a pre-change one into a post-change one, then I think you might find that the new versions of OSIN are very expensive at this time tomorrow. In fact, if you have a look through a lot of these unique items that are being changed, a lot of the less consequential ones than the ones I'm calling out here, one of the things you'll notice, a lot of things are gaining Chaos resistance where they didn't previously have it. It looks like Grinding Gear Games have recognized Chaos resistance is pretty important to have on an endgame character in Path of Exile 2. One final thing I wanted to call out, I've gone for things that I know are going to be impactful first. I just wanted to point out a couple of unique items that grant unconditional chance to poison on them at the moment. These are going to be getting buffs where they're going to have more of that stat. I am not convinced that this is going to be enough in order to matter. So we've got the Snakebite unique gloves and the Plague Finger unique gloves. These are going to both have 20 to 30% chance to poison on hit, where previously they had smaller numbers there. I'm not convinced that this is necessarily going to get these items over the line, but at least it makes them worth exploring, where previously they were not really worth exploring. Anyways, that's a number of little buffs in patch 0.1.1. All the rest of it, I want to go through all the patch notes, but in a more thorough way than I can do at the moment. So I'm going to leave it there. May your Vile Orbs have interesting results, and I will see you around.